All right, we're live on air. So.
Big fancy BBA.
That fancy. Time you got?
And 57.
Take them out. USB.
Don't forget to thank the sponsor. I always forget that.
That look good? Am I missing anything?
No.
I don't do the big, 20-page notes like. Not there's anything wrong with that.
And then forget part of it.
Yeah.
Are you going to any other single Saturdays this year?
Huh? Are you done single Saturday? I'm done for this year.
You're not coming to Columbus, Georgia?
When is it?
It's October 3rd.
Yeah,
Was it
not
Georgia?
happening.
Okay.
Kids do on the 16th. Not happening.
It really should be more specific. I was thinking it was Columbus, Ohio. I'm still mad at them. Yes, they picked me one time. That's all I'm mad about. Real free. Just send a little, thank you for submitting. You can find out. There you go. I see people talking about this. You go, oh, that's good. That's a hard. I mean, I like that. It's hard to say. Sorry, because there are a few the people who will continue.
Okay, everyone, please continue enjoying your pizza. I will just say a few words. First thing is I'm going to go through our lovely slide deck that our head organization passed, formerly known as the Professional Association for SQL Server. Everybody here are past members. Yes, if you're not, please sign up on the SQLpass.org site. It will give you access to a lot of information, a lot of free training, as it were. There are yes, there are virtual chapters, many virtual chapters. Stephen here is head of one of them. Lots of free training and opportunities out there for growth and learning. The PASS Summit is in Seattle again this year. It is the first week of November, I believe.
Last week of October.
Last week of October. I'm wrong about that. I don't know because I am unable to go. However, it's an excellent event to go to if you can talk your boss into going. At this point, it's a little pricey, but I still recommend trying to get there if you can. As stated, we have lots of virtual chapters. Here's all of them. Stephen, which one are you over? DBA Fundamentals, and it's up there, third row, second column. They have a great chapter, and I try to go to those when I can. Here's kind of the next meetings that they have set up here. This is all available on SQLpass.org. Here's our upcoming SQL Saturdays. Great, I didn't have it memorized. Las Vegas, kind of far away. So are San Diego and Denver. Spartanburg's not too far though, and a good friend of mine, Lindsay Clark, is running that one. It'll be a pretty good event. There's a lot of good people that are going to be speaking there. Internationally, if you're abroad, here's a nice list of those. I'm unfortunately not going abroad. I can't go to any of those. You have 24 hours of pass, which is coming up September 17th. I didn't know it was that close. Wow. There's always volunteering opportunities to look at. Like I said, SQLpass.org. If you go there, there's all the information for looking into all this stuff, and there's really good opportunities out there. The Passion Award is always given every year to someone who does the best volunteering work, and it's considered a very prestigious award within the community. As always, stay involved. Quick and sweet. I'll let you go to get your stuff up. All right, other words. Our sponsor this month is Tech Systems, and I'm going to have Kayla Moreland step up here and say a few words about their organization and potential job openings that they have.
Hey guys, sorry the pizza was a little late. He got stuck in traffic, so I do apologize for that. Most of you have been talking with some of my partners, Matt and Uma here. All three of us are from Tech Systems. We focus. Tech Systems has done a great job of aligning each recruiter to a specific skill set, so we're not trying to learn everything because we cannot do your job like we can. So we try to focus on one area and learn as much as we can about that so we can do our jobs better for you guys. If you have any questions about what's open right now or just about what's going on in the market, all three of us are very aware of that, so feel free to reach out to any one of us if you have any questions.
Great, thank you. Let's give them a hand, please. Anybody else have any other job openings that they'd like to speak to or like to announce to anyone they might have? No? Okay. Well, today we have John Boulineau, who is going to be speaking on continuous integration using SQL Server Data Tools. If you will, please silence your phones so that there are no interruptions. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me and coming out to the user group. I've been a part of a user group for a long time and been very valuable to me, and I'm sure it is for you guys as well. So I'm always excited about speaking here. So just real quick, a little bit about me. I lead data integration teams for a company here in Nashville. There's my contact information. I tweet pretty regularly. I used to blog. There's still some content out there. I haven't updated it in a while. And then my email address. I'll put this back up at the end of the presentation. So today we're going to talk about continuous integration. And the last time I did this presentation in Atlanta at SQL Saturday, there was some confusion about what continuous integration even is. Somebody thought it was about SSIS, and it's not that, okay? Continuous integration is something that's pretty familiar if you're an application developer. It's something that's been around for a little while in the application development world. It's still sort of bleeding edge for database development. But we now have good tools that helps this tremendously, which is what we're going to talk about today. So what is it? So continuous integration is the practice of frequently executing all of the things that you do to modify code and get it into production. Preferably automated. In fact, I would say nowadays, if you're not automating your integration and your testing, you're not doing continuous integration. So why? Why do we talk about it? Why would we care about it? Well, the whole point is to drive out inefficiencies in your development practices, okay? So the idea is to change in small units, okay? So when you're modifying or developing code, make small changes at a time and integrate that into your running applications, okay? So that you always know that it's working, okay? So you're avoiding complicated troubleshooting that way, right? If I deploy a change, if I deploy 50 changes and something breaks, what change broke it, right? Eliminate lengthy integration processes. And by integration, I'm talking about integrating into your current code base or your current databases. And it encourages better code, okay? So testing automation is a critical component of continuous integration. And therefore, it encourages you to write testable code. Testable code is modular code, and modular code is easier to maintain and change, okay? No more 4,000-line store procedures anymore, okay? So let's think a little bit about putting this in context, right? Putting something like continuous integration in the context of what we do today, right? And I'm guessing that this process is going to look familiar to some of you, right? So if I want to go and add or change my database, change a store procedure, a view, a table, right? I open Management Studio, right? That's the first thing everybody does, right? Make the change in a development database, right? Does this strike anybody as strange to make a change in a development database? Changing an application while it's running, right? Who does that? But we think nothing about it. Attempt to test my change, right? Well, what did it affect? I don't know. If I change the name of an attribute on a table, what effect did that have? Can you say? You're going to attempt. Hope you didn't break anything, right? Hope my views are schema bound. Hope I changed all the store procedures that needed to be changed because of the new attribute name, right? Check the change in the source control. If you remember, everybody has their database code in source control, right? 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 Yeah. All right. Beg the DBA to approve the change, right? Bring donuts. And work through whatever red tape it requires to deploy the change. Okay? It's the old way of doing things, right? That's the way most of us do things today, right? Does this look familiar to anyone? Right? What we're talking about today is completely turning this on its head, okay? Completely changing the way we think about developing on database code, okay? So let's look at it a little bit differently. What does it take to bring changes to production, right? All of these different things. We're doing it manually and infrequently, right? Sometimes prayer is involved. Sometimes sacrificing chickens is involved. Tea leaves, right? This is the way we do it today, okay? Continuous integration is all about changing that, okay? So with continuous integration, the first thing you do to kick off the process is check changes into source control. You can't do continuous integration without source control. It's impossible, okay? Run standards checks, meaning I have automated checking of standards, so I don't have to go to the DBAs to prove the code anymore, okay? I'm creating test data, automated. I'm running unit tests, automated. Running integration tests, automated. And I might be even deploying code to production, automated every day. Crazy, right? And at least daily. At least daily. Maybe I'm doing this if I'm developing on a new application or developing a new database or making heavy changes. Maybe I'm doing this 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12 times a day. Okay? That's the new world. So what I'm going to talk about now is how we do that with SQL Server Data Tools. And I know not everybody is probably familiar with SQL Server Data Tools yet, so we'll do a little short introduction to those, and then we'll move into how continuous integration works. So that's all of the PowerPoint slides. Let's get into demos. All right. So SQL Server Data Tools is a part of Visual Studio. Okay. So Visual Studio comes with MSDN licenses, which most people nowadays have because it's cheaper to do development SQL Server and things like that. But if you don't, that's how you get it. So I have, this is 2015, which just came out, but you can do this in everything since 2012, I believe, or 2013. I've showing here, I have a database in Azure. This is an Azure database. So I've connected to that. So that's my development database. And I have a solution. So has anyone used Visual Studio before? C# development, awesome, something like that. Okay, very, very similar feel. If you've written C# application before, you'll feel it's just like that, okay? So when you create a solution, it creates a database project. In this case, it's called ADI Test. ADI is the name of one of my teams. I did this presentation for them when we were kicking this process off. And so typically what you'll have is a folder for each schema in your database. So if you have multiple schemas, you'll have multiple folders. You have a scripts folder here, which we'll talk about in a minute. And typically underneath this, you'll have a procedures, a tables, a views, user defined type, function, folder, whatever to keep your code organized, okay? Now when you see here, we have a table and a store procedure. Those are just files on my hard drive. That's it, okay? That's not pointing to a running database or anything. I'm just modifying text files here, okay? So when I'm making changes, I'm not actually touching a running database, okay? I'm just updating text is all I'm doing. And this is the solution that manages that. And we'll talk about some of the other things here in a little bit. Okay. So one of the new things that we'll all be learning is declarative development. Okay. Nowadays, we're doing things like when we want to make a change to a table, we're running alter commands, right? We're running DDL, right? That's not how declarative development works. Declarative development works is I'm describing how my database should look when the changes are applied, and then allowing my deployment and publish processes to decide what needs to be done on the database side to make those changes. All right, so let me say that again. I'm not actually making the changes. I'm describing the changes that need to be made, and then allowing the tool to change the database for me. That's a little bit scary for some people, right? But that's how it's working, okay? So when you're working in data tools, things like alter is not an allow keyword. If you have an alter statement in one of your files in a data tools project, it will fail. It will throw an error. It will say this is invalid. Okay. So that takes some getting used to. Okay. So we'll talk about what publish is in a few minutes. So let's talk about how making changes work. So I have my database project up, and I've kept it very, very simple here. I only have one table and one store procedure defined here. So I'm keeping it very, very simple because we're talking about a pattern, okay? And to keep from being distracted. So imagine you're just started developing on a new database, okay? And I've created a contract table. So in Data Tools, I have something that may look familiar, like an old designer window, but I also have the text at the bottom. So I can do both, okay? I can do either one will work fine if I'm going to make changes. One of the things that, just to emphasize that Microsoft is really encouraging developers to go this way, is that they're making changes to SQL, the language, to be more declarative, right? So, for instance, in 2014 or in 2012, this syntax is illegal, right? Adding an index as part of my create table command. Okay, that will actually fail. In 2014, so I would have to do something like this. I would have to have a create table and then a create index separately, right? But because I'm really wanting to describe the state of each object in my database and then allow the tool to decide how those changes are made, that declarative approach, they've actually made a change in 2014. The syntax of a create table statement actually allows you to define that index within the create table statement itself. Right? It's a more declarative approach. I'm describing the complete table and all of its dependencies in one thing. Okay? And so this, again, is simply just reading text off of your hard drive, right? So this is actually not opening up Management Studio, connecting to any databases or anything like that. It's just text. And if I'm editing it and saving it, it's just changing that file on my hard drive, okay? But there are some differences. It's not always that simple, okay? So there's certain things that we need to do a little bit differently. And one is to get familiar with refactoring. Okay. So if I want to go in and make a change to say, I'm going to change this contract name. I don't like that it's abbreviated. I want it to be spelled out. I don't mean contract in AME. Okay. I don't want to go ahead. I don't want to just go ahead and make that change in the text. Why not? You want to tell me what the problem with that is?
It might create a new column.
And what will happen to the other column? Drop it. It'll be dropped, okay? Depending on how you set up your publish profile. By default, it wouldn't drop it. It just wouldn't work. It'll say a change that would cause, or a change that would cause data to be affected is detected, and it won't even publish it, okay? What else? I might break other code, right? I might break a view or a stored procedure or something like that if I just made that change and a view was referring to that name, right? Have you ever done that before? Yeah. I have, many, many times, right? So to get around that problem, in Data Tools, you have a refactoring operation. So the keyboard shortcut is Control-R because all developers love keyboard shortcuts, but you can also right-click and you have a refactor. Okay, and I can do a number of things. I can rename that. I can move the table to a new schema. I can expand wildcards. What that means is if I have a select star, I can do expand wildcards and it will complete my column list, sort of like what SQL prompt does. Or I can fully qualify names, you know, schema qualify and such. So in this case, I want to rename. Okay, so it's going to allow me to rename that. So I want to do contract name. Okay. So what it does then is the Data Tools process will go in and look at all my other code, all my stored procedures, all my views, detect all the places where that column is referenced, and we'll say, here are all the changes that this refactoring operation will make. Okay. And then if you click apply, all of your views, stored procedures are updated, and your table's updated. And my refactor log gets updated. So now I know, or the project has a record of what's actually changed. So when I go and do my deployment, it looks at this refactor log and says, oh, that's not a table drop, that's not a column drop, a new column, that's a rename. So that's how it knows. So it's critically important for a lot of reasons to use that refactoring capability. So again, I'm just describing the things that need to happen and think about it in that declarative way. I'm providing all the information that the deployment process will need or the publish process will need to go and make the changes to my database for me. Okay. So I'll never have to open up Management Studio to change any database. Okay. So the other thing that's happened is it's keeping track of my changes in the background. Okay. If you've worked with Visual Studio before, this is no surprise. So it's actually keeping track of everything that I'm changing in my pending changes part of my Team Explorer. Okay. So it's really important to use this. I think most people that are using source control are used to checking in one file at a time or one object at a time, okay? That's not the way this works, right? You need to check in all changes at once because there's metadata files, that refactor log gets checked in. All of that is critically important. So it's important to check in all of your changes at once. Now you can roll back changes here. If I wanted to roll back the change that I did, I'd just have to right-click on that object and roll back, undo, which is really handy sometimes if you screw things up and you don't know what you screwed up. I'm not going to say I know that from experience, but it happens sometimes, right? So that's the basics of Data Tools, just its operations, okay? There's a lot more that goes into it, and there's folks out there that do great presentations on it. But that's not the point of this. The point of this presentation is to move from that and unlocking some of the more powerful aspects of using Data Tools, like continuous integration. Okay. So let me pause here, see if there's any questions so far. Yes, sir.
Have you tried using Git for your source control?
Yes, you can, and it works fine in Visual Studio. I'm sorry?
All the changes will get applied.
Okay, let me talk about that in just a second, if you wouldn't mind. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Is the project set up at the instance level or at the database level?
The database. Yeah. So each project is a database, right? That's the level of the project. Now, if you wanted to, you could have a solution with multiple database projects in it. Okay. That can get a little bit complicated, but it just depends on how you develop your own internal development and deployment practices.
All right, so in that situation where you've got multiple, is that refactor going to go across all of those?
I don't know. I don't think so, but I don't know.
So either.
I don't know because I don't operate that way. I have one solution for each database. Good question. Any other questions? I need to get better about repeating questions. Y'all hold me to that one. So the next steps, let's talk about adding code, adding store procedures, and we'll add a stored procedure, and then we'll also talk about publishing and how that changes, how the database actually gets changed. Okay. So if I have a contract table, right, I probably want to have an API to my database. So I want to start creating some views and store procedures. So I've created a object called USP get contract, and to create new, simply right click, add new item, or you can shortcut. There's lots of different items, okay? Basically everything that you can think of, schema, user, whatever, there's items for. But there's also some shortcuts to some more popular ones, right? So I may add a new table, and it will allow me to name it, and it will create the skeleton framework of that table for me. Okay. So if I want to add a store procedure, if I want to develop a new store procedure, what's the first thing I do? First thing I should always do when I develop a new store procedure. Anyone developed a store procedure before?
Yeah.
What's the first thing you do?
Create this procedure.
Create the procedure. Write the code. Start SSMS. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. Permissions, names. How many of you were thinking, write a test?
Nobody. No one thinks that way yet.
Yeah. You should. As a matter of fact, let me get up on my sandbox. If you are not building automated unit test and integration test programs, get up, go back to work, and start working on it. Automated unit test and integration test suites is the single most important thing you can do to speed up and improve the quality of your development practices. Period. Okay? Let me say that again. Automated unit tests and integration test suites are the single most important thing you can do to improve and speed up your development practices. Okay? So why would I want to start with, let me get down off my sandbox. Why would I want to start by writing a test?
Because then you know if you pass or fail, if it's in fulfill the contract.
Oh man, contracts, code to contract. That's awesome. So I would know.
Do what it said it's going to do.
I did what it said it's going to do. Absolutely. What else? What's the other value of writing that test?
If you don't know how you're, if you don't know how to test what you're writing, how do you know what to write?
Oh, that's a great point. So I need to know, let me phrase that a little bit different. It's a design tool, right? Because when I'm writing tests, I'm thinking about developing my code from the point of view of the consumers of my code. So I start thinking about when somebody calls this store procedure, What are they going to expect? Right? What results are they going to expect? How many rows do they expect? Do they expect just one or more than one? What error conditions should I present to them? Under what conditions should I throw an error? What type of error should I throw? All of those things you can write unit tests to ensure you're doing. And once you've written those unit tests, they're there forever. I can run them over and over and over and over again. So if I have 400, 500 store procedures in my database, I may have 1,000, 1,500 unit tests. But when I make a change to a table and I run those unit tests, how confident can I be that I didn't break anything? Right? That's what testing is all about. That's what automated testing is all about, is building confidence in my code, building confidence in my development. So as I change, I can change faster with confidence. Okay? So when I make a change to a table and I run my unit tests and I see a whole bunch of green checkboxes, how many people love to see green checkboxes? I love green checkboxes. Yes. Imagine seeing a full screen of green checkboxes saying all my tests passed after I made a change to my database. Oh, awesome, right? So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write a unit test. So to do that, and as you can see, I've pre-written some code because unless you're daring, you should never write code in presentations, right? So again, I can right click and create unit tests. You see that? That easy. And what that will do is it will create a new project in my solution. I can name it something. In this case, I've named it unit tests. And we'll create a sample unit test. Okay. So this is a unit test, basically a framework for creating unit tests for SQL. Okay. And there's 3 elements for each test. There's a pre-test, there's a test, and there's a post-test. Okay. So the pre-test is used to set up data, right? Or set up anything that I need for my test to run. In this case, I probably need data in my database. Okay. Probably need a set of test data. So when I go to the pre-test part, I can see that I've inserted a record into my contract table. Okay. And I have named my unit test get contract returns 1 row. Okay? Because I expect that when I run this store procedure, I'm going to get a row back. Okay? And I've set up that row that I expect to come back. Then there's the test, which really just executes the code. Okay? And then there's the post-test, which allows me to actually delete that test data that I put in there if I want to. All of this is optional, except for the actual test part. So depending on how you set up your testing methodology, you may or may not use that. You may have a tool like Redgate data generator or something like that, that every time you deploy a test database, it just fills it with random data. Whatever you come up with that works in your environment is fine. The key thing is that you're doing it often, right? And you're doing it automated first. Yeah. So now, when I run this test, it'll actually execute my code for me and tell me whether it works or not. Simple. Really, really simple, right? But as I go through and I'm developing more and more store procedures, and so let me step back. I may create more unit tests. I may create a negative unit test. What if it doesn't find something? What should it do? What should my store procedure do? If I ask it to give me a row and it doesn't find one, what should it do? Should it throw an error? Should it be null? What should it do? Well, I can write a test to make sure that it does that, right? How many times have you been testing a store procedure and you've commented out code and you forgot to uncomment it later? How many have left testing code in a stored procedure? How many have ever done that and it made it to production? I have, right? So this gives me a great check to make sure that as I'm developing and if my unit tests run, I can get really confident that I didn't do anything crazy. I didn't mess up anything, okay? So I'm gonna write a lot of unit tests, okay? To give me that confidence. Okay. So what's the next thing I want to do after I wrote my unit test? Come on. Sorry? Deploy it. What? Write code to make it pass. Anyone else? Sorry? Run it locally? Run what locally? The store procedure? Unit test? So I want to run the unit test now? What do I want to run the unit test now? I haven't written my code yet. Make sure it fails, right? Why do I want to make sure it fails?
So it's a valid test.
Yeah, so it's a valid test. If I don't know it fails, right? I don't know. I can't trust that test yet. I want to make sure that it fails first so that I can know if something goes wrong, it's going to fail. Okay.
First thing in SQL, like you're writing something and you don't know that, and you think it passed, but it really just didn't do anything.
Right.
This way you'll know that A, it did something, and B, that when you write the code, make it pass, that it's really working and not just doing nothing still.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So there's a number of ways I can do that, but I can actually run it locally. So there's a test menu here. And this may or may not work depending on how firewalls and things are working. Because my tests are pointed to my Azure database. So I can run all tests. And I have a test explorer here. And it's in process is running. As you can see, I tested it earlier in the day. So what it's actually doing now is it's actually deploying my database. It's actually publishing my database so it can test against the most recent code. Okay, so it's going to take a minute. Ooh, and it failed.
Red.
All right, I got a red X. I hate red X's more than I love green check marks, right? Oh, it didn't actually do a deploy. I'm sorry, I told you wrong. So I haven't actually updated my database that is running the test again. Remember how I changed, right?
Yeah.
So it's detecting that, right? So let's come back to testing. All right. Any questions about unit testing? All right. So it's something, go ahead.
How do you configure the unit test to go to the database that you want to try? Is there
So yes, there is. Here in this app config, I have a, where is it? Here we go. Execution contexts, right? And has my password in there, so I'm not going to scroll over to the right at this point. So that's where, so you can configure multiple contexts here with, and they're really just connection strings. So you can connect to wherever you want. So the question was, can I point it to different databases to run against? The answer is. Any other questions? All right, so let's talk about automating this process, right? So how often do I want these unit tests to run? At least once a day. How about every time I check in code, right? So that's what continuous integration, that's what I really want to do, is every time I make a change, every time I commit code to my source control repository, I want to make sure that it's good code, right? Has anybody ever worked in a development team when somebody broke the build? right? Not a good situation, right? So what this allows us to do is run those, is set it up to where when I'm checking in code, I'm also going to test my code. Okay. So the way I accomplish that is through something called a continuous integration build. And this is extremely easy to set up. So let me show you that. So let me step back a second and let's talk about the process that I want to have happen. Okay. I want to check my code into source control. I want that code to be deployed to a database so that I can actually have something to run my tests against, right? And then I want my unit tests to run against that new code base, that new deployed database, okay? And so the way that happens is that, and this goes to your question earlier about how it knows, is that it looks at the changes that are made, and then it uses an API called DACFX, okay? All right, is anyone familiar with DAC packs, DAC, PAC? Okay. So those are configuration files, essentially, or configuration packages of configuration files. They're actually compressed multiple files in that one file. And there's an API called DACFX that can read those configurations, compare your code to the code that's actually running in the database, decide what changes to be made based on configurations that you specify, which we'll show in a minute, and then deploy only what needs to change. Okay? So that's what's happening behind the scenes. But you don't see anything like that because, as we're about to see, it's really a very simple configuration step. But that's what's happening behind the scenes. It's doing that comparison. That API is running that comparison, deploying your changes, all for you. You don't have to know that. Although you can know that, and you can interact with the API yourself with PowerShell or C# or something. Okay? So that's what I want to make happen, right? Commit my changes, deploy my database, run my unit test, all automated. And the way I do that is with something called a build configuration. So in my Team Explorer here, I'm in my pending changes pane. Let me look at my builds. And here at the top, you'll see I've already run some builds. I've actually run some test builds, make sure everything was working right. Okay. I'm actually going, let me, because those take a minute, let me go back here and I'm going to check in my code. I'm going to check in my changes, okay? All right. Change set checked in. Okay, so it's now up in my Visual Studio Online account. Well, and so now what it's done is it's automatically kicked off a new build. See at the top? CI, number 1 in the queue. Okay. So if you have multiple developers working at the same time, they can be checking in and queuing builds, and you may end up being second or third in queue, but you can all be running independently. And so what I've done to enable that is I've just created a new build. Added a new build definition. And I've done something really, really complicated. I've clicked a button. All right? Our radio box. There's multiple different types of builds, but in this case, I have continuous integration. Build each check-in. Okay? And so when it listens for me checking in, and then it kicks off this build process. So the only other thing that I've done to make this work, because see it has an automated testing session, run tests in source, and matching a particular, and this works, you don't have to change anything. So it's going to look for any tests that you have and run them automatically. The only other thing I've done is I've told it that it needs to publish my database. Okay. So this is the MS build arguments. I've given it a published profile. Okay. So remember how I told you we were going to talk about these other files here? See, I have these XML files called publish. I have a lot of these, and all these are configuration files that say when I'm deploying a database, what do I do? Right? Do I drop the database and completely recreate it? Right? Do I ignore changes of a particular type? Do I ignore indexes? Do I ignore security changes? Right? There's lots of different things that I can configure. In this case, what I've done is I've given it the database that I want to connect to. It's a pretty familiar dialog box. Server name, database name, username and password. So I've said that when I publish this database, I want it to go to this place. Okay. And this is where I can configure this, right? Like one of the things that we talked about at the top about earlier about dropping columns, right? If I rename a column, it might drop it. If I have this check, block incremental changes or incremental deployments of data loss might occur, will prevent that from happening. But I could take that off if I wanted to. Okay. So this is how I'm just making a configuration of when I deploy changes. This is what I want to have happen. Okay. Backup database before deployment if I want to. Lots of different things I can do. Okay. And so all I've done is in the build, I said when you deploy the database, use that configuration. Okay? That's how I want it to be deployed. So now when I just checked in my changes before, that build definition executed and began following my instructions. So actually I can go out to my Visual Studio account and actually see what's happened. It's succeeded, but partially. My test results, I've had failures. I don't have a green checkbox anymore. And you can configure how it shows and things like that. So if I go and I look at my test results, I have one failure. I got multiple different statuses for my tests. Right? I can look at my test results and I can see that my get contract return one row failed. And I can see why. The result did not contain at least one result set. Right? That's what I wanted to see. My code's broken. Now the awesome thing about this, as a lead of a team, or of teams, what I like about this is I can have it send me an email when somebody screwed it up. I don't do that. But you can send the email to the team members, right? So if somebody's out of the office or something, or if somebody checked it in and went home for the day, the whole team will find out if the build succeeded or not. Okay? So build management is something that's very important. But the really important thing is, how long did it take me to find out if my code worked or not? Next to no time. Right? How many times has it been that it took you a long time to discover that something was broken?
Or it got to production broken.
Or it got to production broken, right? So every time I check in code, I know if my code works, at least at that functional level. Now, this doesn't replace integration tests, right? Running things in sequence, because bugs can happen in interaction of components, right? I'm just testing the functionality of individual components of my application. But this does give me a high level of confidence as I'm going throughout the day, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times a day. I get really good confidence that the things that I'm doing are appropriate. So now what I can do is now I can start writing my code, okay? And I've done the cardinal sin, right? Select star. But now I've written my code. Okay, so I have accepting a contract number, and I just want to return one that, and that's the primary key, and I just want to return that one row. Okay. So one of the other things I can do is I can run test builds, right? So I can just right click on this and I can do build solution, and I can see if it's going to, I haven't run my tests, but I can see if it detects any build errors. So look what it discovered. It actually said, don't do select star. It actually inspected my code and said, this violates best practices. You should really rethink this. Okay. And as, say, a DBA, I could actually modify, I can actually say that you have to modify that and make it an error and make your build not pass if you violate standards. Okay. And you can add rules to this if you want to. So that goes into that standardization validation, right? That automated, all those code reviews that your DBAs may have to do, let Visual Studio do it for you. Let TFS do it for you, right? Let SQL Server Data Tools do that for you so that I can deploy to production much, much faster. Okay, I don't have to do that waiting period. And there's other tools out there that are better than this probably. There's a tool called Enlight that's very, very powerful that plugs into Visual Studio. But that can be a very, very, I don't know how long it takes you guys to get code approved, right? But wouldn't it be awesome if we just automated that? Yeah. So I can test my change. I can just run my unit tests. Let's see if anything changes. So again, this is taking longer because I'm using the Azure database in the cloud. And so it does take a little bit longer. If I was running, so there is a way, so in Visual Studio, you can get something called local DB that comes with it. And that's the default sort of thing that you do. Local DB is sort of like a SQL Server Express type of a database that is on your laptop or your desktop or your workstation. And it allows you to test without having a SQL Server database or an Azure database set up. So that's going to take a little bit of time. Oh, results did not take at least one result set. Why? Because I haven't deployed it yet. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my pending changes. It's detecting that I changed my store procedure. I'm going to check it in. And go to my builds. I can see I've got a orange exclamation mark, not anything anybody wants to see when they're talking about their code, right? But I do see that awesome green checkbox down at the bottom, right? That's what I want to see. So when I go out back to Visual Studio Online, I can keep track. So again, if you have a large development team, right, you may have multiple builds going in, and this is the place where you go to see the builds that have happened in the past and who checked them in and who broke the build and who gets to wear the funny hat today because they broke the build or has to stand in the corner or get the cube in the basement or whatever you guys do. And I can follow along with what it's doing. Okay, so it's seeing it's kicked off on the build agent. Refresh this, and it shows the history of my builds here. So the length is how long the build took, and the color is the outcome, the result. So you can see I haven't had a very good history of builds here. And it's going through its process, right? It's compiling it. It's running, it's doing the deployment now. So it's doing the build. Okay. It's associating change sets and work items. This is like a project manager thing. So I can actually, if I'm working like in a Scrum team and I have user stories, or a Kanban team, I can actually associate code changes with the user stories that I'm working on. So I can keep track of everything from that perspective. So this is collecting summaries of my builds and what's happening. And unfortunately, this is one of the worst parts about doing demos is when you have something that takes a long time. So there's a lot of waiting involved. But what's going to happen is when I should see a successful build, right? I've made sure that my unit test failed. I've implemented my code, and now I should get a nice green checkbox, which is what I'm looking for, or a check mark. So I can actually go back and see if I'm wondering how long is it going to take, how long has it taken in the past, right? So I saw the last build took 3.3 minutes. And the last time I did it was 8.9 minutes ago. So I get an idea of how long I got to get to find out if my code worked and my build succeeded. My test results succeeded. I have green all over the place, and green makes everyone happy, right? Cool. Sorry? Oh, get green. No, but a lot of development shops are tying performance to test coverage, right? So developers are actually now being evaluated on the test coverage of their code, meaning when I write code, I better have tests for that code.
You can't guarantee it works.
Say what?
If you can't guarantee it works, break something. What good is that?
Yep. So that's continuous integration from start to finish. Once you get it down, it takes 5 minutes to set up, right? It takes 2 minutes to start writing unit tests. And there's lots of different kinds of unit tests that you can write. Dig in, there's good documentation on that. Some really powerful unit tests like schema validation, right? If I wrote a view, does it match the schema that I expect? Does it return the attributes that I expect? I can test against that. There's lots and lots of things I can do. And at the end of the day, every time I check in code, I know my code works. Any questions? Yes, in the back?
How does it, how do you connect that to the database? Like what connections do you use? Server authentication, Windows authentication?
You can do either. Yeah, you can do either. So if you use Windows off, so the question was, look at, I'm doing that good now. The question was, how does it actually connect, when it does this deployment, how does it actually connect to the database to do the deployment? And the question is, you can use either Windows off or SQL off, depending on how you set it up. So you saw those connection strings in that config file earlier, right? It all depends on how you set it up. If you set up Windows off, it uses the service account of the build controller, okay? So if you're using Azure, you're gonna use SQL off. But if you're doing it internally and you've got Active Directory or something like that, it uses the service account of your TFS build agent. Any other questions? I think there's, yeah, go ahead.
So if you deploy it to the database and someone go open the database on the management studio and made some change, well, this next time you're in the development will detect that change?
Will it detect that change?
Yeah.
Okay. So the question was, if someone, make sure I get this right, if someone opens up Management Studio, right? Someone's using the bad old way, opens up Management Studio, connects to the database that I'm deploying to and makes a change, what'll happen if I make a change? Anyone want to take a guess? Depending on what the change is, it's probably going to overwrite it, okay? Depending on what the change is, it'll either overwrite it or it'll fail your deployment, depending on what the change was. So best practice and what I do with my team, what do? Developers don't have access to that database. You can't touch it. You can't make changes. You can only deploy through source control. Cool. Question? Thank you, Edwin.
Have you ever implemented this on an existing database?
So the question is, have I ever implemented this on an existing database? The answer is yes, and it's very easy because there's actually a data import wizard or a database import wizard that you can start from a blank project, point it to your database, and it will build all your existing code base.
But then you would have to go back and do the unit tests.
You have to go back and do the unit tests. Yeah. Yet another reason to start writing them first, right?
What happens if the database is on replication mode?
So what happens if it's in replication? Don't have the foggiest idea. So I think I've never done this on a replicated database.
Not replicated database, but it's like one table, on publisher side. When you change to that, does it take consideration of any replication, like stopping replication?
Yeah, so does it take consideration of if I'm making a change to a database that's being published? Don't have this foggiest idea. There is a replication expert in the room, though. Is there a replication expert in the room? Robert has some great presentations on replication, so he might have a better idea than I do.
I don't like using the word expert.
That's why I use it. Any other questions? All right, I'll hang around for a little while. Thanks for coming. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you got something useful. Thanks for coming.
We are going to do a drawing. If you would fill out these smaller pieces to take a look at.